Welcome, everyone, to the show where we take some of the heaviest ideas from centuries of thought and really just give you the essential synthesis.
And today, we're going big.
We are tackling the granddaddy of all philosophical questions. I mean, this is the one that provides the bedrock for every single assumption we make about the world.
We're talking about the great idea of being.
It's the most foundational subject you can imagine because it just asks one simple thing. What is real?
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But it's truly the fundamental question. We're diving into what it means for anything at all to be rather than not be.
Right. It's a phrase that sounds almost like something a child would ask.
But trying to define existence and essence and reality, I mean, that's what has driven the Western tradition for, 2,500 years?
And defining it is exactly our mission today. We've been working through a really intricate essay that focuses on this core concept, primarily referencing the tradition of the Syntopicon.
Our goal here is to give you a shortcut.
So you can grasp the core definitions of existence, from the ancient Greeks searching for permanence all the way to the modern struggle for meaning, and do it quickly and clearly.
And before we jump into those classical definitions, we should probably acknowledge the engine that's driving this whole analysis.
Good point.
You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic essay analysis.
And this setup really lets us synthesize and connect these incredibly dense threads across huge philosophical tracks. It lets us spot patterns, and debates that might otherwise take years to untangle.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational concept.
The Syntopicon tradition says there are three major components that any coherent account of reality, any theory of being, has to integrate successfully.
That's really the starting line for metaphysics, isn't it? Any system that tries to define reality has to weave together these three things.
First is existence.
Right, the brute fact that something is there. Then you have essence.
Which is the definitive nature of what that thing is.
And finally, change. The fact that everything in the observable universe is dynamic, it's shifting, it's temporary.
And if you can't account for how those three things coexist, your whole philosophical structure is just shaky.
Well, and as we're about to see, philosophers often end up prioritizing one of those elements over the others.
Which is exactly why they end up with such radically different views of the world.
So let's start at the absolute beginning.
When philosophers use the word being, it's a heavy technical term. How do we distinguish that from, the casual way we might use it every day?
Well, in classical philosophy, being is inherently dual. It refers to two simultaneous aspects that you really have to keep separate for the analysis to work.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the simple, unqualified that it is of anything that exists. We call this existence. It's just the brute fact of presence.
Right, and the second part?
The second is the what it is, the essence or its nature.
So the blueprint.
Exactly, the blueprint. The set of necessary properties that make a thing what it is and not something else. So, for example, the existence of a particular bronze statue is just the fact that it occupies space and time.
But its essence?
Its essence is its shape, its material, its form, everything that makes it a statue, and not, say, a puddle of molten bronze.
That distinction immediately creates a philosophical ripple effect, doesn't it? If I understand the essence of a chair, I know what it's supposed to be, what its characteristics are.
But that knowledge doesn't automatically mean a chair exists right now in this room.
Exactly.
And this is what allows us to separate what are called contingent beings from a necessary being.
So most of what we encounter from, physical objects to living things, even the whole cosmos, those are contingent beings.
Their essence is defined by characteristics that do not logically require their existence. They exist, but they didn't have to exist, and they will eventually cease to exist.
So every single concrete thing that you encounter daily, your coffee cup, the building you're in, the car you drive, all of that is contingent. It depends on something else for its existence.
Correct. And they are contrasted, as you said, with a necessary being. This is the ultimate philosophical stopping point. It's the entity whose very essence is to exist.
So it's what it is and it's that it is are the same thing.
They're totally united. Its non-existence is, logically impossible, or at least conceptually contradictory within the framework of reality, and this becomes the cornerstone for so many metaphysical and theological systems.
That definition of the necessary being really sets the stage for the first major philosophical split in the Western tradition. Let's turn to Plato. He looks at the world and concludes that reality must be found somewhere else entirely.
Plato was just obsessed with the problem of change. I mean, think about it. If everything in the physical world is in a constant state of flux, things are born, they age, they decay, how can that ever-shifting, sensible world be the source of genuine permanent knowledge
Or true reality.
or true reality?
It's an incredibly intuitive starting point, isn't it? If a definition of justice keeps changing depending on which society you're in, then true justice must exist outside the changing whims of society.
Exactly. So Plato makes this dramatic move. He concludes that true being must be transcendent. He anchors being in a hierarchy of eternal, intelligible forms.
And these forms, they're not physical objects.
No, not at all. They are perfect, unchanging, non-material templates or principles. They exist in an intelligible realm, completely separate from our sensory experience.
So the form of the circle is perfect circularity itself. It's not any circle I can draw with a pencil, because that will always have imperfections.
Right, and the form of beauty is perfect beauty, which makes every sunset or piece of art we call beautiful just a reflection of that perfection, a shadow.
And this hierarchy builds up to the most powerful concept in all of Teutonic metaphysics, the form of the good. This is the absolute highest principle, sitting beyond all the other forms.
It's paramount.
Why is it so important?
Well, Plato uses his famous analogy of the sun. The sun does two things at once, right? It grants visibility to objects, allowing us to know them, and it also provides the energy, the life that allows those objects to be.
Okay, I'm with you.
The form of the good does the same thing for that intelligible realm. It provides the intellectual light that makes the other forms knowable, but more profoundly, it grants them their very reality and their perfection.
So here's the core insight for you, the listener. Sensible, physical things, the objects we can touch and see, they only are because they imperfectly participate in these eternal, unchanging forms.
They are shadows of true reality.
They're participating in the form, but they're corrupted by the physical matter they're made of.
And that physical matter subjects them to time, to decay, to imperfection. So true being, for Plato, lies beyond the flux of this visible world. It requires a mind, not just senses, to grasp it.
And this original Platonic move sets up the conflict that basically defines philosophical history. Is reality what we see, or is reality a set of invisible, transcendent principles that structure what we see?
That transcendent move, however, it did not sit well with Plato's greatest student, Aristotle.
Not at all.
Aristotle was a phenomenal biologist. He was an observer of the natural world. And he felt that if true reality was so distant and separate, it just made the physical world irrelevant.
He essentially brings being down into the concrete, observable world. Aristotle asks, if the forms are separate, how do they actually cause the physical world to be what it is? Why do all acorns grow into oak trees and not, I don't know, zebras?
Right. A huge practical problem. So Aristotle argues that being is found right here, in concrete substances, in individual things that successfully unite form and matter in this world.
The form isn't separate anymore.
It's not separate. It's the structure or the essence that is inherent in the thing, shaping its matter. The form of that bronze statue is in the bronze. It doesn't float separately in some Platonic heaven.
So the object we interact with, a horse, a house, a person, that is the fundamental reality, the substance.
And he emphasizes that the first property of being is unity. To be a being, a thing must be a unified, single, identifiable whole.
A random pile of atoms isn't a being.
No, but a living, functioning organism is. This unity is what gives the substance its stability, even while its parts are constantly changing.
And this unity is what lets us analyze the being based on its inherent purpose. This is the concept of telos.
Yes, telos. It means the end, the goal, or the characteristic activity of a thing. To be, for Aristotle, is to be ordered toward a characteristic activity and fulfillment.
We understand what a thing is by watching what it's designed to do.
By observing what it achieves when it is fully functioning.
Okay, let's unpack that with a few examples, because this is where Aristotle becomes so practical. We already mentioned the acorn becoming the oak tree. That's its biological telos. What about an artifact, something man-made?
Good question. Consider a watch. Its parts, its matter, are ordered by the watch's form to achieve its characteristic activity, keeping time.
So if the watch fails to keep time, it still exists.
But it has failed to realize its essence, its telos. It is, in a very profound sense, an imperfect being because it is not fulfilling its purpose.
And we can apply this even to political or social structures, which Aristotle did all the time.
Absolutely. For Aristotle, the telos of a human being is eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well, and that's achieved through rational activity.
Okay.
And the telos of a political community, a polis, is to enable that flourishing for its citizens. So the reality of a state is judged not just by its existence, but by how well it actualizes its purpose of facilitating the good life.
That is such a fundamental difference. Plato requires us to look beyond the world for true reality, towards some abstract, perfect principle.
While Aristotle grounds being in the world, he requires us to look at the world at observable, functioning individual things and study their characteristic activities and their inherent goals.
The classical foundation really gives us a clear choice between these two powerful, competing views of reality.
It does. And this setup, the Platonic transcendent ideal versus the Aristotelian immanent substance, it created a massive metaphysical challenge for later thinkers.
If you accept both systems, you're just left with a completely disjointed universe.
The challenge was to integrate the permanence and ideality that Plato demanded with the concrete reality and scientific observation that Aristotle championed.
And the thinker who provided the most durable resolution to this was Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas performed a spectacular feat of philosophical engineering.
He didn't just borrow from both of them, he invented a concept that fundamentally reconciled them.
He did. He introduced a central concept where being is treated as the active existence that actualizes an essence.
Okay, say more about that.
Essence, following Aristotle, provides the blueprint, the limiting definition of what a thing is. But existence, which Aquinas called actus essendi, is the pure dynamic energy. It's the activation that brings that potential into reality.
Let's use a modern analogy to make this tangible. Think of essence as a software code or a blueprint for an application.
It's a helpful analogy.
The code defines the parameters, the function, the limitations of the app.
That's it. The code exists as a potential set of instructions, the essence. But until you run the code, until you confer the active existence upon it by running it on a processor, it doesn't actually do anything. It isn't an actual functioning being.
And Aquinas argued that existence is, in fact, the most perfect thing about a being. Why did he emphasize the active existing over the essence?
Because essence is inherently limiting. Essence defines what a thing is, and therefore it defines what it is not. You can't have the essence of a dog without excluding the essence of a cat.
Right.
Existence, however, is pure actuality. It is the simple act of being that is shared by everything that is real. Therefore, the more a thing has the act of existence, the more perfectly it is a being.
This leads us directly back to the necessary being, which is essential for Aquinas' whole system to function. If existence is an act conferred upon an essence, there must be a source that doesn't receive that act.
Exactly. This is the theological dimension that completes his metaphysics. God is defined not merely as a being, but as the necessary being, sometimes called ipsum esse subsistence, subsistent being itself.
Which means?
It means God's essence is existence. There is no potential waiting to be actualized. It is pure, unrestricted, unlimited act of existing.
And this allows the system to explain creation and the entire hierarchy of reality without any contradiction.
Yes. All finite contingent beings,
Right.
everything we observe share in being by participation. They are receiving their existence from this divine source moment by moment.
It's like a stream drawing its water from an infinite underground spring.
Great analogy. The stream is real, but it is entirely dependent on the spring for its existence.
And this participation explains why there are graded modes of dependence and perfection.
The closer a being is to pure unlimited actuality, the higher its mode of being. A purely intellectual being, like an angel in Aquinas' schema, has an essence that is closer to pure form and less constrained by limiting matter,
Then a living organism or a piece of inanimate rock.
which is heavily constrained by matter and potentiality. So Aquinas gives us a universe where the transcendent source of Plato actively infuses existence into the observable substances of Aristotle. It was a profoundly comprehensive and stable worldview.
But history doesn't stand still. As we move into the early modern period, roughly starting in the 17th century, the focus of the philosophical project shifts dramatically away from the existence of objects outside of us.
This is a critical transition. After the scientific revolution, after the Enlightenment, the emphasis shifts from what exists ontology to how we know what exists, epistemology.
Right, with thinkers like Descartes.
Exactly. Descartes challenged the entire medieval system by saying, I can doubt everything about the outside world, the existence of the stars, the trees, even my own body.
He starts with radical doubt, trying to find a certainty he can build on.
And he finds it, famously, in the Cogito. I think, therefore, I am. The one undeniable fact is that the knower exists as a knowing subject.
And this marks a fundamental turn.
It does. Philosophy no longer starts with objective reality and substance, but with the subjective consciousness of the observer.
So instead of asking what is reality, we start asking how certain am I that I perceive reality accurately?
Precisely. Modern philosophy often tries to analyze being through the lens of logic or science or language. It grounds existence in our cognitive frameworks rather than in its independent nature.
And this fragmentation defining existence based on measurability or logical proof, it really sets the stage for the dramatic crisis that Heidegger addresses centuries later.
We've seen the world defined by essence, then by the act of existing, but now the entire ground shifts.
Okay, let's pause for a second here. This is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
If you enjoy this kind of detailed analysis of classic ideas, make sure to check out Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI essay analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
We take dense subjects just like this one and break them down into digestible frameworks that really make complex ideas stick with you.
And we truly need those frameworks because the next thinker we're going to discuss forces us to drop all prior assumptions about structure and permanence and just face the raw, terrifying fact of existence.
We're turning to the 20th century.
And to the figure who might be the most influential metaphysician of the last 100 years, Martin Heidegger. He didn't just offer a new definition of being. He argued that the entire Western philosophical tradition had been on the wrong track since Plato.
Heidegger's claim is profoundly simple, yet radical. Philosophy has forgotten the meaning of being itself.
So he's critiquing the entire history of metaphysics.
The whole thing. He argues it got distracted by being's entities, the things that exist, instead of being with a capital B, which is the sheer, mysterious, grounding fact of existence itself.
So classical thinkers like Aristotle defined being in terms of permanence and substance. Aquinas defined it in terms of the act of existence flowing from a necessary source.
And Heidegger says those are all definitions of beings, not the ground of being.
What's the distinction?
It's a key distinction. If you define a hammer by its presence or its utility, you haven't answered the question of why there is hammering at all. Heidegger felt this forgetfulness led Western culture to define existence in sterile, technical, or logical terms, reducing being to mere presence or availability for use.
To truly retrieve the question of being, Heidegger insists we cannot start with substance or logic or God. We have to start with the entity that actually cares about the question.
Exactly. He argues philosophy must start from human existence, which he gives the special name of Dasein.
Dasein literally means being there.
It does, but it's so much more loaded than that.
And what defines Dasein as distinct from, say, a rock or a tree?
Heidegger defines Dasein as the being for whom being is an issue. Only Dasein is conscious of its own existence, its past, and its ultimate non-existence, its mortality.
So Dasein doesn't just exist, it relates to its existence.
It's always projecting itself into a future defined by possibilities.
This perspective makes the concept of being profoundly personal and urgent for you, the listener. The question of reality isn't some abstract puzzle, it's rooted in my anxiety about my own death.
Absolutely. Dasein is characterized by its thrownness. The fact that we find ourselves existing in a world we didn't choose, with circumstances we didn't design.
Right.
And our relationship to that existence is often characterized by anxiety, not over a specific danger, but over the sheer contingency of our being.
And what's the philosophical goal here? What are we supposed to do with this?
The goal for Dasein is authenticity. To live authentically is to confront one's temporality and mortality fully, accepting the openness and uncertainty of existence.
Rather than hiding in the things.
Exactly. That comfortable, prepackaged, conventional way of being defined by society. Heidegger forces the abstract question of being into the domain of personal choice and temporality.
That's a radical departure. We've gone from a stable, eternal reality with Plato to a temporary, subjective, and anxious reality with Heidegger.
The nature of being is now inseparable from the entity asking the question. It's necessary to pause here and just appreciate the breadth of territory we've covered. The sources present such a rich and often conflicting dialogue about reality itself.
We can now clearly map the four major distinct streams of thought on reality that define the Western tradition.
First, we have the transcendent approach of Plato. True being is eternal, perfect, and ideal, existing outside the physical world in the realm of the forms, accessible only by our intellect.
Second, the immanent and teleological approach of Aristotle. Being is a concrete, unified substance found in the observable world, defined by its characteristic activity and its inherent purpose, its telos.
Third, the act-in-essence synthesis pioneered by Thomas Aquinas. Here, being is the dynamic act of existence that actualizes a limiting essence, with all creation flowing by participation from a necessary being whose very essence is existence itself.
And finally, the existential and Dasein approach of Heidegger. This moves the focus from defining existing entities to questioning the sheer fact of existence itself, making human awareness, temporality, and anxiety the essential key to interpreting being.
The value of really digging into this is realizing that these aren't just historical footnotes, they are live possibilities for defining reality today.
Now let's bring this back to the framework that helped us structure this massive amount of material. The Syntopicon tradition, rooted in the work of Mortimer Adler. This framework helps us organize and evaluate these competing doctrines.
Indeed, Adler includes the capitalized, technical term, the great idea of being, and I'm stressing the concept, among the 102 great ideas that run like continuous threads through the Western canon.
Ideas like liberty, truth, and causality.
Exactly.
What was the primary motivation behind this Syntopicon for the average reader?
Well, the purpose was not to establish a single truth, but to map the conversation. Adler wanted to show how major authors, from the ancient Greeks up through the 20th century, converge and diverge on these core questions.
So it proves that philosophy isn't a single settled narrative.
Not at all. It's a continuous, often cyclical dialogue where Plato keeps arguing with Aristotle through their successors.
And for the listener, this approach offers a practical, critical toolkit. It forces you to move past just historical recall to active philosophical judgment.
That is the core value. Adler's framework encourages active participation by providing 4 rigorous criteria for testing any doctrine of being, whether it's Platonic, Aristotelian, or some completely new modern formulation.
The first test is coherence.
This just asks, is the idea internally consistent? Does the philosophy contradict itself?
Can you give an example?
Sure. If a philosopher says that all reality is fundamentally material and transient, but then uses eternal non-material laws of logic to argue that point, the system might lack coherence. You have to ensure that the components, existence, essence, and change, don't logically cancel each other out.
The second test, which seems inherently practical, is correspondence to experience.
This asks, does the doctrine actually match observable reality in human experience? If Plato claims true being is external and perfect, how does that framework adequately explain the observable reality of change and imperfection that we rely upon for daily life, like physics and engineering?
And conversely,
Conversely, if Heidegger focuses entirely on subjective Dasein and temporality, does that adequately account for the objective, permanent structures we observe in mathematics or astronomy?
I can see how that criterion immediately filters out purely academic theories that don't ground themselves in the world we actually live in.
Absolutely. The third test is practical consequences. This moves beyond academic logic and asks about impact.
So what does a specific belief about being change in the real world?
Well, imagine 2 individuals. One believes all existence is fundamentally random, contingent, and without inherent purpose, defined only by chance encounters.
A kind of reductive reading of modern existentialism.
Right. And the other believes all existence is ordered toward a divine telos, an Aquinas view. Their belief systems will dictate how they approach education, political governance, business, even personal goal setting. Their views on technological progress will be profoundly different because they define the limits and purpose of human being differently. The practical consequences are massive.
And finally, the fourth and perhaps most crucial criterion, moral implications.
This test asks, how does the doctrine of being affect ethics and behavior? This is where metaphysics directly influences morality.
How so?
If being is defined purely by material substance and utility, meaning a person is just a complex machine, then human worth might be relative, based on measurable productivity or utility to the state.
Whereas,
However, if being is defined as participation in an eternal, absolute act of existence, the Aquinas view, then human worth is absolute, inherent, and intrinsic, regardless of productivity or utility.
so your definition of reality fundamentally shapes your definition of right and wrong, of value and worth. Adler is forcing us as listeners not just to learn history, but to decide which definition of reality aligns with our deepest moral intuitions.
And Adler's ultimate goal, after encouraging the reader to test these systems rigorously, is not to declare a winner. Instead, he argues for a great balancing act.
He wants the well-informed individual to achieve a synthesis.
A synthesis that appreciates both Platonic transcendence, the eternal ideal necessity, and Aristotelian immanence, the concrete, here and now reality.
He recognized that the deepest truths about reality likely integrate the enduring structure of the ideal with the undeniable flux of the material. A well-rounded thinker needs to be able to navigate both streams simultaneously.
That's the challenge.
This journey through the great idea of being shows that understanding these concepts isn't just an academic endeavor. It provides the essential philosophical toolkit. How you define existence, whether reality is fundamentally permanent, temporary, material, or ideal, informs how you view everything.
From how to educate your children to the purpose of human life, and even the very limits of scientific knowledge.
It's the conversation that underpins every other conversation we have about technology, art, politics, and religion.
And if we recall Aristotle's fundamental starting point, he claimed that unity is the first property of being. If something is real, it is a unified whole.
And if we carry that Aristotelian insight forward into the modern age, the age of big data, rapid analysis, and scientific specialization, it leads to a fascinating closing thought for us to reflect upon.
So here it is. If unity is the first property of being, how does the pervasive modern analysis of existence through fragmented data, the isolated scientific study, the analytic language of specialized fields, the reduction of human experience to measurable data points, how does that affect our ability to perceive that fundamental unity?
Do our sophisticated, segmented methods of knowing threaten the cohesive nature of the reality we seek to know?
It's a profound challenge to end on. Have we traded unity for clarity?
We've covered a massive territory, giving you the critical synthesis you need to answer those questions for yourself. Click the link on screen for the in-depth essay summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based essay podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.